"Excuse me, this event is for invited guests only." That's what the hostess said to me. But it wasn't her words that stung. It was the way she looked straight through me, like I didn't belong. Then came the nod. Vanessa, my sister, standing just behind her, gave the tiniest nod of approval to block me. I stood there, dressed in midnight blue silk, my heels echoing softly on the marble floor I had paid for, and realized something chilling. They still didn't know. Vanessa glanced at me with that same smile she used in high school when she won and I didn't. The smile that said, "Stay in your place." And then my mother appeared, clutching her pearl necklace like it might save her from shame. "Madeline, please," she whispered. "Don't embarrass us." They thought I was crashing the party. They thought I couldn't afford the food, the wine, the staff. They had no idea. I owned this place. Right on cue, Michael, my head of security, stepped forward. "Ms. Carter, the Winston suite is ready. The quartet just began your father's favorite piece, and the bourbon has been decanted." Silence. Vanessa blinked. My mother stopped breathing, and I smiled. "Good," I said. "Let's not keep our guests waiting." I walked past the people who'd spent years telling me I'd never be enough, and into the room they thought they'd rented. They hadn't rented anything. I had given them the night, and I had taken my voice back. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you, drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And just out of curiosity, what time is it where you are, when the truth finally comes out? Now let me take you back to where Madeline Carter's story began, before they knew who she really was. You know how in some families, there's always one kid who shines just a little brighter? In mine, that was Vanessa. From the moment she could talk, it seemed like the world just bent to fit her. She was cute, charming, effortlessly social. Teachers adored her, neighbors praised her. My parents, they built their whole identity around her success. And me? I was Madeline Carter, the older sister, the quieter one, the kid who asked too many questions and never smiled quite right in photos. We grew up in Austin, Texas. Nice house, white shutters, perfect lawn. From the outside, we looked like a catalog family. Inside, it was a play with only one star. Vanessa was the lead. I was the stage crew. She got piano lessons, tennis clinics, designer shoes. I got a hand-me-down laptop and vague advice like, just be more like your sister. By middle school, I had already learned how to disappear. I got good grades, but never made a scene. I doodled hotel floor plans in the margins of my notebooks. I sketched lobbies with glass staircases and rooftop gardens while my parents raved about Vanessa's SAT prep scores and early admission chances. When I told them I wanted to study hospitality and business, my dad lowered his newspaper and said, "So, you want to manage other people's vacations?" My mom added without looking up, "Darling, just marry someone successful. You're too pretty to work that hard." I was 17. That moment cut deeper than I realized at the time. Vanessa got into Yale. They threw her a backyard party with gold balloons and champagne. I got into Texas State. My acceptance letter got pinned to the fridge, behind a coupon for frozen shrimp. I left for college before sunrise. No send-off, no tears, just a half-hearted, text us when you get there. I was 19 when I started juggling 3 jobs: morning shifts at a budget motel, afternoon classes, nights bussing tables at a wedding venue. Weekends, I cleaned Airbnbs owned by people who didn't know how to say thank you. I paid every bill myself. Scrubbed bathrooms until my fingers cracked. Took finals after 12-hour shifts. No one called. No one asked how I was doing. One night, during a break in the motel laundry room, I opened a message from Vanessa. It was a photo of her holding a croissant in front of the Eiffel Tower. "Study abroad, baby! Paris is heaven!" She looked radiant. I looked at my reflection in the dryer door. Hair in a net, shoes soaked from a plumbing leak, vending machine dinner in my lap. I didn't cry, but I did something else. I promised myself that one day I'd own a hotel that Vanessa wouldn't be able to afford a cocktail in. No one saw it coming. Not my parents. Not Vanessa. Certainly not me, at 21, with exactly $82 in my bank account and a dream I didn't dare say out loud. They stopped asking what I was doing, and I stopped offering, but just because they weren't watching didn't mean I wasn't building. Quietly, carefully, relentlessly. And one day, they would walk into my world thinking they still knew who I was, and I would let them, just long enough, to show them how wrong they'd always been. The first hotel I ever stepped into as more than just an employee was the Coral View Inn, a tired 3-star place with peeling wallpaper and a lobby that smelled like lemon cleaner and regret. I was 22. I wasn't hired to do anything glamorous. I worked the graveyard shift at the front desk, where most of my job involved resetting room keys for drunk guests and explaining that no, breakfast didn't start at 2 a.m. But I watched. I watched everything. How the night manager cut corners on inventory. How the cleaning staff ran out of linens every Friday. How the owners, 2 brothers from El Paso, argued about renovations but never actually made any. While others complained, I took notes. I learned what not to do long before I ever had a budget to do anything. By the time I was 24, I'd worked at 5 different hotels across Texas. Small, big, chain, boutique. I moved between cities without telling my parents. They assumed I was still figuring things out. They were half right. Because during all those moves, all those jobs, I was building something behind the scenes. A binder. It sounds ridiculous now, but that binder held my first blueprint for something bigger. A business model. Branding concepts. Guest experience flows. Vendor contacts. Cost-cutting strategies that didn't ruin the soul of a hotel. Every mistake I watched someone else make went into that binder. Every idea I had at 2 a.m. behind a front desk went into that binder. And then I met Dr. Avery Coleman. She was a guest speaker at a hospitality conference I snuck into with a borrowed badge. Former GM of a major resort group. Sharp as glass. No patience for fluff. After her talk, I followed her into the hallway and said, "You don't know me, but I think like you." She raised an eyebrow and said, "Prove it." So I did. I handed her my binder. All 212 pages. She read it on the flight home. 2 weeks later, I got a call offering me an unpaid position on her strategy team for a new boutique hotel in San Antonio. Unpaid. I took it anyway. I worked days at a chain motel to pay rent and spent nights and weekends building financial models and guest flow diagrams for her project. 6 months in, Dr. Coleman pulled me aside. "You've got something," she said. "You don't just copy ideas. You see gaps. You solve invisible problems. I know consultants who charge 6 figures and can't think like that." That was the first time anyone looked at me and didn't see a backup plan or a disappointment. She introduced me to investors, small ones at first. Real estate agents, retired operators, one former chef who still believed in service the way it used to be. By 27, I had raised just enough to do something crazy. Buy a hotel, not a new one. Not a fancy one. A failing one. The Belmont. A once elegant, now almost forgotten hotel outside Dallas with outdated carpets, dusty chandeliers, and a booking rate that could make you cry. Everyone told me not to do it. The market was too saturated. The location was too risky. I was too young, too female, too unproven. My parents didn't even know I was doing it. They thought I was still working front desk somewhere in Houston. I didn't tell them because I knew exactly what they'd say, so I closed the deal anyway. I lived in a tiny staff room on the 3rd floor while I renovated the first 2. I slept next to peeling wallpaper and made espresso with a $20 machine from Craigslist. I hired former coworkers I trusted, paid them what they were worth, and built the entire guest experience from scratch. And slowly, quietly, we turned that building around. Room by room, review by review, guest by guest. By 29, the Belmont was named one of Texas Monthly's top 10 hidden gem hotels. My parents didn't say a word, not because they didn't care, but because they still didn't know. As far as they were concerned, I was still their figuring it out daughter, probably scraping by in some dusty reception job, doing her best. And I let them think that, because the truth? It was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could do it without them. And I did. But I wasn't done. Because what came next was the part they couldn't ignore, even if they tried. It started with a group text. From my mother, of course. Planning Dad's 65th, thinking dinner at Giovanni's or maybe that place? Belmont something? Thoughts? I was standing in the elevator of my second property in Chicago when I read it. The Belmont something. The hotel I had poured 5 years of sweat and sleepless nights into. The hotel I had lived in. Bled in. Rebuilt from the foundation up. My mother had no idea it was mine. The Belmont had been under a quiet LLC. Carter & Company Hospitality. Nothing public, no press. I'd kept it that way on purpose. So when she texted about that Belmont something, I nearly dropped my phone from laughing. Vanessa chimed in first. Belmont sounds more elegant. We need private dining, though. It's Dad's 65th. And then came the part that made my stomach twist. I think it's too pricey, my mom added. Probably out of our budget. And Madeline's. There it was again. Assumption. The unspoken belief that I couldn't afford the hotel I owned, that I'd be tagging along, that I was still the financial weak link. I could have told them right then. Could have said, actually, I'll comp the room because I own it. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the years of being talked over. Maybe it was the silence that followed every one of my accomplishments. Maybe I just wanted them to see it. All of it. Without warning. Without spin. So I replied, The Belmont's dining room is excellent. I've heard it books up fast. Want me to make a call? My mother responded, If you have a connection, that would help. But please don't feel pressured to contribute. I smiled. She thought I had a connection. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Jackson, my general manager at the Belmont. Hi, I need a favor. Tell me. My family is planning a dinner here. They have no idea I own the place. He paused. This sounds like either a terrible idea or a masterpiece. Both, I said. I told him to quote them half the actual rate. I'd cover the rest behind the scenes. They'd feel like they got a deal without suspecting anything. Give them the Winston room, I said. Full service. Premium wines and the bourbon. You know which one. Jackson chuckled. Your dad's favorite? Exactly. Over the next 2 weeks, I monitored everything quietly. Emails, menu drafts, seating arrangements. My mom called the front desk 3 times to haggle about linen colors and whether a 3-piece jazz trio was too much. Vanessa emailed asking about corkage fees and whether a casual upscale dress code was too vague. Every time they called the hotel, they spoke to people trained to act as if I was just another client, not the woman who signed their paychecks. And then, 5 days before the dinner, my phone rang. Vanessa. She almost never called me directly. I answered with my usual careful tone. Hey. So, you're actually coming to Dad's birthday? Of course, I said. Why wouldn't I? She paused. Well, I mean, it's at the Belmont. I'm aware. You sure you can swing it? I know it's not exactly your price range. There it was. Another jab dipped in sugar. I could have laughed. Could have said, actually, I own the wine list. But I didn't. Instead, I said, I have some industry connections. It'll be fine. She sighed. Just don't be late. And maybe dress up a bit. The Belmont is pretty nice. I looked down at the silk blouse I was wearing, one I'd bought during a business trip to Milan. I'll manage. She hung up after reminding me not to overshare personal stuff at the table, as if I'd ever been given space to speak in the first place. That night, I sat in my office overlooking the Chicago skyline and called Michael, my head of security and one of the few who'd been with me since year 2 of the Belmont. He wasn't just staff. He'd seen me negotiate vendor contracts at midnight and unclog bathroom pipes at dawn. He knew what this dinner meant. I want you on site at the Belmont for the dinner. Trouble? Maybe. But not the kind you're thinking. I want you there in case things shift. He didn't ask questions. He knew the tone in my voice. He'd heard it before big investor meetings, acquisition calls, tough decisions. He knew this wasn't about safety. This was about witnessing. 3 days later, I flew back to Texas, checked into the penthouse suite at the Belmont. My suite. Watched from the security room as my family arrived early, fussing over details and asking to speak to managers about floral arrangements. My mother adjusted the centerpiece 3 times. My father paced, muttering about the valet. Vanessa posed for pictures in front of a wall I had personally designed. And me? I stood behind the tinted glass, my reflection caught between marble and memory. For a second, I saw the 17-year-old me again, the one with the frozen shrimp coupon and the acceptance letter behind it. She was still there, still hoping, maybe foolishly, that someone would say, "We were wrong." But I wasn't that girl anymore. This time, I held the script, and I was about to flip the entire narrative. I timed my entrance like an opening act, not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because I wanted them to see it. All of it. The chandeliers, the marble floors, the staff moving like clockwork, every step trained and intentional. I left through the back elevator, circled the block, and entered the front lobby like any other guest. Except I wasn't just any guest. I was the woman who had chosen the granite for that reception desk, approved the music playing through the ceiling speakers, and personally trained the maitre d'. But they didn't know that. Yet. As I stepped into the lobby, I spotted the Robertson couple from the golf club heading toward the private dining room. Behind them, 2 women from my mom's bridge group were complimenting the wallpaper I'd spent 4 weeks custom designing with a local artist. I moved to follow them, but that's when it happened. Vanessa appeared from the hallway, She stopped, blinked, tilted her head. Her expression slid into that signature smirk, the one I'd seen since childhood whenever she felt a power imbalance tipping in her favor. "Madeline," she said, "you actually showed up." I smiled. "Of course." Her eyes traveled down my dress, pausing at the neckline. "Wow," she said, "you borrowed something nice." Before I could respond, my mother swept in behind her. "Madeline, finally. We've been waiting. This is a high-end place, you know. They don't just let people wander in." Then her eyes landed on Michael, who had entered right behind me in a tailored charcoal suit. "And who is this?" she asked sharply. "We didn't arrange for +1s." I opened my mouth, but Michael stepped forward calmly. "Good evening, Mrs. Carter. I'm Michael Young, head of security for the Belmont. I just needed a quick word with Ms. Carter." Security. My mother's entire face stiffened. "Security?" she hissed. "Madeline, what have you done?" Vanessa physically moved in front of me, like a velvet rope come to life. "If there's an issue with her reservation," she said to Michael, "we'll cover her portion. It's Dad's birthday. We don't want drama." My jaw tightened. This wasn't just condescension. It was erasure. They were speaking as if I wasn't even there, as if I were a burden, an outsider, something to be managed or hidden. And then came the final whisper. From my mother, low but sharp. "Don't embarrass the family." That's when Michael cleared his throat, loudly. "Mrs. Carter, Ms. Vanessa, I think there's something you're unaware of." They turned to him. "This woman," he said, gesturing toward me with steady calm, "is the owner of this hotel." The silence that followed was instant and absolute. Vanessa's mouth parted, but no sound came out. My mother blinked once, twice, then took a small step back, as if the ground had tilted beneath her heels. Right on cue, Jackson, my general manager, appeared at the restaurant entrance. "Ms. Carter," he said warmly, "everything is ready. The Winston suite is set as requested. The bourbon you selected is being served with the appetizers." My mother turned slowly to me. "The bourbon? You selected?" I smiled gently. "Dad's favorite. I made sure it was served right." She looked pale. You're the owner?" "Yes, Mom. I own the Belmont, and the Arlo in Chicago, and the Crescent in Denver. 5 hotels in total, soon to be 6. Vanessa's voice finally found its way out. "You've got to be kidding." "I'm not." And then I walked past them, past their frozen expressions, past the hurtful years, the silences, the underestimations. I walked into the Winston suite, where the staff greeted me not with confusion, but with practiced deference. "Good evening, Ms. Carter." "Lovely to see you, Ms. Carter." My father looked up from his seat at the head of the table, confused at first, then curious, then quietly stunned as the realization settled. The maitre d' pulled out my chair. I sat, calm, unapologetic, the way you sit when you no longer need permission to exist in a room. A moment later, my mother entered, slowly, stiffly. She said nothing. Vanessa followed behind her, face red, trying to hold whatever image she'd constructed of herself together. They took their seats. But nothing was the same. The shape of the evening had changed, because for the first time in my life, they didn't get to narrate who I was. I did. And I had just begun. The dinner unfolded like a play where half the cast had just discovered they were in the wrong script. For the first 20 minutes, no one spoke to me directly. They couldn't. My mother kept sipping her wine like it might erase what just happened. Vanessa fixated on her napkin, folding and refolding it like she could smooth out her pride. But the other guests, the neighbors, the golf friends, the co-workers, they couldn't stop asking questions. Wait, you're the owner? You built all this? From scratch? This place is incredible. How did we not know? I answered politely, keeping my voice even. Never bragging, just existing in the truth they had refused to see for over a decade. My father was the first to speak up. He cleared his throat and leaned slightly toward me. So, this is why you've been so busy. I turned to him, giving him space to continue. You own this place? He asked. Not with doubt, but genuine awe. I do, I said. Since I was 29. He nodded slowly, eyes scanning the chandelier above us, the hand-stitched menus, the staff moving like synchronized poetry. I had no idea, he said. None. I know. He paused again. Why didn't you tell us? I took a sip of my wine, considering the answer I'd rehearsed in my mind for years. Because every time I tried, I was met with polite silence or casual dismissal. Eventually, it felt easier to just do the work and let the results speak louder than I ever could. He nodded again, quietly. That nod was the closest thing to an apology he had ever given me. I'll take it. Meanwhile, my mother stayed frozen. At one point, she leaned over and whispered, You deliberately embarrassed us. I met her eyes, calm but firm. No. I protected myself. Her face hardened. This was supposed to be your father's night. It still is, I said. He just learned something new about his daughter. That feels worth celebrating. She didn't respond, but she didn't argue either. After dessert, bourbon caramel cake, of course, my father asked if I'd walk him out. We stepped into the hallway just beyond the suite, the sounds of light jazz humming behind us. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Probably more than one. You don't have to. I do, he interrupted. Because I assumed. About your future. Your path. Your capacity. And I never thought to question those assumptions. That acknowledgement, so simple, landed harder than anything else that night. I nodded. Thank you. You've built something extraordinary, Madeline. I know. We stood in silence for a moment before he said, You're going to have to decide what kind of relationship you want with the rest of us moving forward. I smiled softly. I already have. The next morning, I made a list. Not of grievances, but of boundaries. Clear. Non-negotiable. No more minimizing language. No more family jokes about me being the alternative path. No more comparing my success to Vanessa's with a subtle asterisk. No more last-minute invites with the assumption I have nothing going on. No more access to my time, energy, or resources without respect. I emailed it only to myself, but I began living it immediately. When my mother called 2 days later, I let it go to voicemail. When she texted, "We need to discuss what happened at dinner," I replied, "I'm open to a conversation, but not a confrontation, and not without acknowledgement of what led us here." She didn't respond, at least not right away, but Vanessa did. She showed up to the Belmont 3 days later, unannounced, heels clicking, hair perfect as always. "Can I get a tour of my sister's empire?" she said lightly, clearly trying to make this a joke. I gave her the tour. I answered her questions, but when she asked, "So, any family discount for future events?" I smiled. "We treat all guests equally here." She gave a tight laugh, too quick, too sharp, then looked down at her phone like she needed to escape the moment. "Fair enough," she murmured. But before turning to leave, she hesitated. "I always thought you'd stay small," she said quietly. "That you'd fade out." I didn't answer. And maybe that silence said everything. We both understood what that meant. I wasn't punishing anyone, but I wasn't giving away my power anymore either. For the first time, my success had conditions, and my presence had standards, not out of spite, out of respect. For myself. 6 months later, I stood on the rooftop of the Arlo, my latest hotel in downtown Chicago, watching the skyline shift from silver to gold as the sun dipped low. Behind me, soft music played from hidden speakers. Below me, a wedding party was being seated in the garden courtyard, and beside me, Michael handed me a glass of wine. "To the view," he said. "To the view," I echoed. But I wasn't just talking about the skyline. I was thinking about everything I could see now that I'd finally stopped needing their approval to keep going. My father had visited me twice since the birthday dinner. Not to fix anything, not to rehash the past, but to listen. He'd asked thoughtful questions about the business, how we tracked guest experience metrics, how we managed seasonal dips in occupancy, how I maintained consistency across properties. He never said it outright, but I could tell. He no longer saw me as a daughter with a different path. He saw me as a peer, a builder. My mother had taken longer. She arrived at the Belmont one morning unannounced, but this time with flowers instead of judgment. "I'd like a tour," she said, "but as your guest, not your critic." It wasn't an apology, but it was a beginning. Vanessa remained complicated. We weren't close, but we were civil. She still flinched when I said things like board meeting or expansion plans, but she no longer tried to shrink those words with fake surprise or backhanded praise. And maybe that was enough. I had stopped trying to prove anything to her or to anyone else. I had work to do. That spring, I launched the Carter Women in Hospitality Fund, a nonprofit that offered scholarships and mentorship to young women pursuing careers in hospitality, especially those whose families dismissed their ambitions. The first class had 12 girls. Some were fresh out of high school. Some were mothers returning to the workforce. All of them had been told their dreams were nice, but unrealistic. Just like I had. We matched each one with a mentor, paid for their certifications, helped place them in internships where they wouldn't be fetching coffee, but contributing ideas. One of the girls, Ariana, sent me a letter after her first month at a boutique resort in Santa Fe. It said, "You made a place for me in an industry where no one else thought I belonged." I kept that letter in my desk, right next to a photo of the Belmont the day I signed the purchase papers. Every now and then, I'd flip through my old binder, yes, the one from a decade ago. Pages wrinkled, corners folded, handwriting from a girl who didn't yet know what she was capable of. And every time I saw it, I remembered, none of this was handed to me. I wasn't born into a network. I wasn't handed a legacy. I built one, without their permission, without their applause, and in the process, I found something far more valuable than validation. I found peace, not the kind that comes from being seen, but the kind that comes from no longer needing to be. So if you've ever been the invisible one, the underestimated one, the daughter they forgot to ask about, I want you to hear me. You don't need to yell to be powerful. You don't need to break down doors to belong. And you don't need anyone's permission to matter. Build what you dream of anyway, even if they doubt you, even if they laugh, even if they walk right past you on the way to a party they think you weren't invited to. Because one day, they just might realize the room they're standing in was yours all along. If this story hit home, tell me where you're watching from. Drop a comment below, or just write one word. Ready. Ready to stop shrinking. Ready to be seen. Ready to write your own story. Thanks for listening. Until next time, stay unapologetically you.